Today we consider the operation of the injection system, and closely related to it, the fuel system. Many people think that the engine runs on gasoline. But it is not so. The engine runs on a mixture of gasoline and air. That is, on a fuel-air mixture. He cannot work on gasoline alone, so he needs to dilute the gasoline with air. Ideally, the ratio of gasoline to air in the working mixture is 1 to 14.7. That is, 1 part of gasoline accounts for 14.7 parts of air. Such a mixture is called stoichiometric, that is, there is exactly as much air in it as is necessary for complete combustion of the fuel. And 14.7 to 1, this coefficient is designated as lambda. Hence the name of the oxygen sensor. However, as you understand, there are no ideal conditions, so there are sensors in the injection control system that are designed to correct these parameters and fit them to the ideal. In other words, when the engine is running, the control unit constantly adjusts the fuel supply based on several parameters. The main parameter by which the amount of fuel injected into the cylinders is determined is the Massachusetts of air sucked into the cylinder during the duty cycle. The duty cycle is the complete cycle of all engine strokes: inlet, compression, working stroke, exhaust. And the Massachusetts of air that is sucked into the cylinder in one cycle is called cyclic filling. Moreover, the engine control unit calculates the amount of fuel, based on the magnitude of the cyclic filling. This value is calculated in the control unit and depends on the air Massachusetts and crankshaft speed. Air enters the intake manifold through the throttle, and just before the throttle, a sensor is installed to measure the Massachusetts of the incoming air, denoted. The crankshaft operation frequency is measured by the crankshaft position sensor. By the way, on some cars, the speed can be determined from signals from the ignition system. The formula for calculating the cycle filling is as follows. Cycle filling, measured in kilograms, is equal to the ratio of the Massachusetts of incoming air, kilograms per second, to the crankshaft operating frequency, units per second. In clear words, cyclic filling is the Massachusetts of air divided by engine speed. Knowing the magnitude of the cyclic filling, the control unit calculates a voltage signal, which is proportional to the magnitude of the cyclic filling of the cylinder, and feeds it to the nozzles. The same pressure is constantly maintained in the fuel line using the fuel pressure regulator. On cars with the environmental standard Russia -83, Euro -2, he was on the fuel rail. But the increasing requirements for environmental friendliness forced manufacturers to transfer it to the body of the gasoline pump. So the control unit, knowing that the fuel pressure is constant, and knowing the amount of air, accurately calculates the amount of fuel for each cylinder. That is, in systems where there is no fuel pressure sensor, do not confuse with a pressure regulator, and so, in these systems the control unit does not know the value of the real fuel pressure, it only knows what is in its program. That is why it is so important to measure fuel pressure during diagnosis. After all, if the nozzles open at the same time and the pressure is higher, then the fuel in the cylinders, in the same time more will come. And this is already a rich mixture. A working mixture of air with gasoline is formed in the intake ducts and in the cylinders. A precisely measured amount of gasoline is sprayed by the nozzle above the intake valve, whether it is open or closed. When the valve opens, the air-fuel mixture is drawn into the cylinder in the form of a cloud. In its work, the control unit takes into account a lot of data on which the fuel supply depends. For example, when starting the engine, it enriches the working mixture, that is, it supplies more gasoline. Also, a different amount of fuel is supplied when the engine is idling, at operating modes, and at maximum load. This takes into account both the temperature of the incoming air, and the opening angle of the throttle, the temperature of the engine itself. The block makes all these adjustments based on data from tables like this. Such tables are called calibrations, and are stored in the memory of the control unit at the production stage. Calibrations can be different, depending on the party and the vehicle equipment. Each batch of calibrations is assigned a number. It can be recognized when the scanner reads the identification data of the car. It will be after the inscription, software version. In the last lesson, I casually mentioned a feedback system. Here is a case, such as an increase in fuel pressure and feedback is needed. For this, an oxygen concentration sensor is installed in the exhaust manifold. It determines the presence of oxygen in the exhaust gases. And if the fuel, for example, is more than necessary, then accordingly the oxygen in the exhaust will be less. Such a mixture is considered rich. The oxygen sensor immediately reports this to the control system. The unit responds to this by reducing the fuel supply. If the Lambda probe after a while determines the oxygen in the exhaust, then the amount of fuel supplied increases. Thus, the mixture constantly fluctuates between a little poor and slightly rich. Together with oxygen sensors, catalytic converters are used, the task of which is to reduce the emission of harmful substances into the atmosphere. An oxygen sensor that controls the composition of the mixture is installed in front of the catalyst. In accordance with Euro-3 standards, the operation of the catalyst itself must be monitored. Therefore, on machines with Euro-3, a second oxygen sensor is installed, but after the catalyst. It controls the efficiency of the converter.